Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to have great conversations and learn some things along the way. I'm Isaac Levin, and today I'm really excited for my guest today. My guest is a fellow streamer. My guest today is Brian Clark. Brian, do you want to say hello, introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. I am Brian Clark. As Isaac said, I do stream. I do programming related streams and just general education stuff, some career and just general wellness type of things too. And yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Isaac.
Oh, I mean, the fact that you said yes is awesome. Like we were talking about before when we were setting up. This is just an opportunity to have a great conversation. So I hope we can have one of those today. Typically, when I get started with this, just to setting the stage, I'd love to get kind of your developer origin story. I've had people who are new into tech and have started their careers recently, and I've also had people that have been writing code since like the 70s. So using punch card computers and things like that. I'd love to get your understanding of like when was the point in time where you came across tech and you're like, this is it. This is what I have to do in my career, in my life.
Well, one, I wasn't around in the 70s. I wasn't even
Well, me neither.
so to share some of that there. But the first, oh, that's a good question. So what got me into tech? I probably would say video games was the thing that really got me interested in tech in general. Like Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis was like probably one of my first consoles I really kind of grinded playing games on, and grinding being like a gaming term, like you just
Sure,
really
yeah.
play it for hours on end, right? Um, so Sega Genesis and like all the, if you think of all the gaming consoles throughout time, like kind of in that regard, that's where my interest started. And it led me to want to get into game development. One of the big ones that really that pushed me or like gave me that interest was Halo. That game is one of my all-time favorite games. And then so much so that like I was following along with the original development company that created that, which was Bungie. Still a fan of them. I just not a big Destiny like player anymore, which is jumping ahead a little bit. But what's great from Bungie side of things is they had their website, and they would like, I was like deeply into the community. They had some forums on there, but they would also do these blog posts or these like kind of spotlights of people that worked there, which was really interesting to me because I had an interest in potentially going into game development.
Yeah.
But what I learned from that, and so I'm super grateful of them for creating those blog posts, because what I learned from that, while it was interesting, hearing about their lifestyle that they had to like live when
Yeah.
deadlines were coming up and what that industry is like, I was like, yeah, I don't think I really want to not see my like I have
Yeah. Yeah.
ambitions to have a family, settle down, that kind of stuff, and I want to spend time with my family and stuff like that. So not to say that you can't get that done in the gaming industry, but the feeling I was getting as a young Brian was that's a little bit more difficult to balance in when working in the industry. So then that's when I was like, okay, I always liked tinkering with computers too. We ended up having, maybe this isn't as old as some of the folks that you might have had, but like my first computer was a Packard Bell with
Same.
Windows 95 on it, I want to say. And so like I would just always spend time on that, just tinkering and learning the ins and outs and how can I do this different things on it. And that interest grew into, I want to start building this stuff. So that's kind of how it all started, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because I'm in I think I might be a couple of years older than you, but I think it a lot of things you said resonates very well with me. Where it's like I played video games and I'm like, oh, video games are cool. Like I want to build video games or test video games. Like I thought testing video games would be like the greatest thing ever, right?
Mhm.
There was this show on Nickelodeon. I can't remember what the name of it was, but you could like basically design a game on like a piece of paper and send it to them, and they would actually like build the game for you.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and like I can't remember what show that was, but I remember it's like, oh, that's so cool. Like you can kind of define what you want to do and send it in, and they'll do it for you. And then I think to your point, you find out that game development is a very challenging career, especially like when you're shipping, like when around the time when you ship a new version of the game. So that kind of turned me off as well. I think too, one thing that's interesting is like just the idea of like things that you can immediately touch, like websites, video games, all these sort of things. Like the generations before us, like they were usually just looking at console screens, right? So like I can imagine how difficult it would be like getting really excited about like just some text showing up on like a console interface. But like a website, like in the Web 2.0 world, right? CSS and JavaScript, like you can make things fly across the screen. You can have all sorts of crazy things. You can have your MySpace profile crash the browser. Like you could do all sorts of things, right? And that's what really excited me. And it's great to hear that, you know, you're in a similar vein where it's like just that ability to touch things and like, you know, game. I think for most people that are our demographic, video games was like the start of everything. Like, you
Mm.
know, we grew up in you know, starting with like Nintendo, Super Nintendo, all the way up to like the PlayStations and Xboxes. Like, spend so much time doing those things, uh, and it'll be interesting to know like when we're 60s and in our 60s and 70s if we still game a lot.
I think so. I
Yeah,
think so.
yeah, yeah.
I don't see myself stopping because like even now being a dad and everything, I still try to find time to carve out to keep up with the games and playing the games that I find interesting because it's like a nice outlet for me and it's
Yeah.
just something I've always done. But I want to flip the script on you
Sure,
a little bit.
of course.
Uh, do you think, being that we're like in that similar time frame, do you ever think back like, oh man, well, I mean, here we are, both of us stream,
Yep.
both of us are into tech, both of us like the gaming. What could have happened if we were game streamers from the start? You know, we could be one of the, you know,
I don't.
just
I
you ever
don't even.
think about that?
So I feel like I'm probably like 3 or 4 years too old. Like,
Oh
so
yeah.
I've had this conversation. I'm 35. I've had this conversation a few times with myself. It's like, why couldn't I have been like an influencer? Like, because I feel like most of the influencers are probably like just turning 30 now. So I feel like there was this point in time where you were 12 years old and YouTube was around. You were 12 years old and Facebook was open to not just college students. Um, and that was really like this enlightenment period for
Yeah.
influencers. And I think I missed the window. Not to say that I couldn't have pivoted at some point 5 or 6 years ago and be like, I want to be an influencer, or 10 years ago be an influencer. Um, but I see people like you know, Marcus Brownlee or folks like that who started when they were like 14 and now they're just filthy rich. And I'm just like, that could have been me. That could have been me. I like talking about tech, like, but beside the point, I'm very happy with the career path that I end up having.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but I think that's really, your point is very interesting about, and I think a lot of it too, especially in the last 2 or 3 years with the pandemic and kind of how things have moved. Like, this is the easiest way to communicate with with a large audience, right? Because for the most part, a lot of social media is really a downer. Like Facebook is a
Mm.
downer, Twitter's a downer for a lot of it. And now you're seeing like Twitch or TikTok, like it's all about dopamine drips.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like these dopamine drips have kind of championed a lot of people to like move into this space of like doing interview type shows on this, because 10 years ago this wasn't even an opportunity or a medium to even use it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you hit it spot on in terms of like timing, right? Like the age and timing of
Yeah,
things. I agree with you. I'm happy with the way things turned out. I'm just saying,
yeah.
like, you know, always ponder as a human
Oh
being, like,
sure.
what if I went down that path? So I think timing is definitely part of it. But the other thing is like maybe it's just a generation of that raised us. It was very heavily like you got to go to school, you got to get a degree.
Sure.
The game, like they were like anti-gaming. You know, there's a lot of that in the news of
Yeah,
like how games. I mean, even a little bit to this day,
yeah,
it's kind of, but I think it's kind of quieted down a bit. Of like games are bad for kids and it causes issues and
yep,
whatnot, right? So you combine those two things with that generation of raising this generation, and some persevered, some kids persevered, and they were like, "I'm just going to keep doing that anyway," and they turned it into a career. And I'm like, I'm happy for
yeah,
them. That's awesome, and it leaves me wondering, like, oh man, you know, that could have been a possibility.
yeah,
Um, so it's cool, it's interesting, something to think about, and I'm glad to see of these like witnessing the evolving of potential careers too, like this whole content creation and being a streamer. Like I
yeah,
don't have an aspiration to be an influencer or a big time streamer like that. But it's cool to watch and like follow along and understand the culture within that space a bit too, which I enjoy
yeah.
doing.
It's quite like, and this is a conversation I think we can take the entire hour with, but I think it's very crazy to me like this like influencers are their own form of celebrity, right? Like you have traditional celebrities like that are people that have been famous from TV or music or movies, and then you have like people that are influencers but like maybe they're brand ambassadors or they're things like that. And you've seen them because they've been in a million commercials. Like do you remember like the Can You Hear Me Now guy, right? Like
Yes.
that guy can't
Yep.
walk down the street for the rest of his life without somebody saying Can you hear me now? I don't know his name, but everybody recognizes his face, right?
Yep.
And then you move into like this. I love this thing that you said about content creation. People saying, I have an opportunity to get my point of view across in a very unique way. And I think it's been around for a while, this idea of like influencer, but like again, I think just the mediums that have been created over the last 5 or 6 years have really enabled that. Like Vine, I remember Vine was like the first like platform where it was like people just record like random videos and put them on the internet. Like that's weird to me. And I never really got into it, but now I'm like really deep into TikTok and I get it. It's just interesting how some people are just really forward thinking. They're like, I got to get into this like right now because
Yeah.
because you know we only have so many hours in the day, and investing your time into something, if it fails, you're like, oh well, I guess I tried. But if it hits, you're like, oh well, now I can't go outside for the rest of my life because people know who I am.
Well, I have another question for you as well,
Yeah,
right? We're streaming right now, and you
yep,
mentioned like, oh, you didn't understand Vine. I'm with you on that. This did you have that kind of similar feeling with like live streaming gaming or live streaming art
yeah.
or live streaming this type of stuff?
I
Did you have that same reaction when you
I'll
first
be
heard about
let me be 100% clear. I still do not understand live stream gaming. I
it?
do
Okay.
like I completely understand like the market for it and why it's so popular, but I don't understand why viewers want to watch it. I
Yeah.
like so for
I have an
me,
idea for you, though.
yeah, I guess I never really had that experience growing up, like sitting in a room with like 5 or 6 friends and we're all playing Halo, like and me just watching. I'd always
Mhm.
play Halo, or I'd play
Mhm.
Smash Bros, or I'd play whatever, right? Like I never sat there and just watched it and enjoyed it. If I was watching it, if I was not participating, I'd go get something to drink, or I'd go and do something else. Like I wouldn't casually watch. And I guess now people they're interested in the casually watching, which in my brain doesn't function that way. I guess my brain has to be lit up at all times.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like it feels like you have an opinion, and you're gonna convert me like today. So
Well, I do. I do. I do. I was setting you up there, so thank you, or setting myself up rather even.
yeah.
So my thoughts on it, and this is kind of how I sell it to my teams or companies or anybody that's interested in getting started streaming, especially specific to technology and
Mm-hmm.
programming, like what we're doing here, is I didn't either. Like what I didn't understand. I understand it now, the gaming side of streaming things, but I draw parallels from my understanding there now to how it could apply to programming as well,
Yeah.
programming streaming or any other type
Yeah.
of streaming that is possible. So I was the same boat as you. Like I would sit down. I could not stand sitting there and not playing myself.
Yeah.
I would want to rip the controller out of a friend's hand and be like, "Oh, let me try, let me try." You know, I mean, typical kid stuff going on. So, like to me, when I first heard about like Twitch and watching game streaming, I was like, "No way am I going to watch that. Why do I want to do that?"
Yeah.
So one of the things that I found value in doing that, especially during that time frame, was I mean, games used to be $60 a pop. I mean, some of them still
Yeah.
are today, but you'd
Yeah.
get the physical game, the CD that you pop into maybe the audience knows what CDs are still. By the way, I don't know what the
Yeah.
demographic audience is, but you know, what I mean? You get the
Yeah.
CD, plug into the console,
Mm-hmm.
and that was $60 a pop. And as a kid, that's I mean, even to this day, it's still quite an investment if you got to fork over that much. Let alone you don't know if you're going to like the game or not. So maybe you just wasted $60 on a game that you don't even like and you're not going to play. So with streaming, I can go and watch somebody play that game
Sure. Yeah.
and see, oh, you know what? I think I will actually like that game. It
Sure.
looks fun to me. Let me go get it. I'll fork over that cash. The parallel I draw to that with programming is like maybe you're not into programming just yet and you
Mm-hmm.
want to learn about programming. You can watch somebody stream about it, or maybe you already are, and but you're looking to branch out into another programming language or something, and you've never had seen what the experience is like programming
Yeah.
in like C or C sharp or JavaScript or PHP. You can go watch somebody streaming about that and get that experience and really decide whether you want to invest the time and energy into learning that programming language. The other
Yeah.
parallel I draw here is like, let's say you, all right, with gaming, you already like a game, you're committed to it. but you kind of hit a plateau skill wise. So for me, I
Sure.
like to play the first person shooters, and there's times where I just get stuck. I'm not able to level up in ranks or something like that.
Hmm.
I'll go watch some of the like pro gamers, which is beneficial to have now because you can watch their strategies and tactics and how they, and a lot of times people will ask them questions in the chat, like, how did you get good at doing this or whatever? And they'll talk through that, right?
Yeah.
So you gain that opportunity to learn from them and skill yourself up. And the parallel from there to programming is you can watch, maybe you already know JavaScript, but you feel like you kind of plateaued in your skills there. You want to learn how to do, I don't know, do more recursive functions instead of just straight up multiple functions or something like that, or
Sure.
calling it multiple times, right? You can watch somebody that does that and that'll help you level up as well. So those are the two big points I kind of usually bring up when it comes to, like, I don't understand why people would watch streaming gaming. I don't understand why
Yeah.
people would watch programming gaming. Those are my responses to that because that's what I found to be super valuable.
I mean, like that's spot on. I think like you're using streaming as like a kick the tires experience,
Mhm.
right? Like if I want to like your anecdote about game prices. I remember when the next gen consoles came out and the price went from 50 to 60 and I was like, well, shoot.
Yeah.
And I mean, to your point, like the amount of money that I burned on buying games that I have played for like an hour and be like, nah, this isn't it. Like YouTube helped for a long time, right? Like you could watch gameplay videos on YouTube, and I think like Twitch is like that next step where you can like watch it live and interact with the person that's playing live, which is cool. I think I just don't have the patience. Like my ADD is so much that like I can't watch somebody just running around playing, Fortnite or Counter-Strike or whatever, because I just want to say like, hey, do this, hey, do that, hey, whatever, even though I'm not good and they're way better than me. But what interests me about like programming or like stream programming is I feel that pain, right?
Mm.
So like I have this tangential experience. Like I'm not the best developer in the world, but when I watch somebody who's a developer and they're running through a challenge or they're trying to solve something, like I can start to problem solve. And maybe I just don't have that thing from a gaming perspective. I literally just game to tune everything out.
Mm.
So maybe that's why game streaming hasn't really picked up. But I'll literally watch, folks like you, some of our friends who are also live streamers. Like some of the streams are long, and I'll watch them. Like, and a lot of it is just like, why isn't this working? Google search, Google search, Google search. Why isn't this still working? Right?
Yeah.
And like I enjoy that, um, because typically when you see like demos or people doing coding, you see it on the stage or a presentation. Obviously, before COVID times, now a virtual presentation now, like it's so perfect. It's so perfect, right? And I know as somebody who used to build demos as a job, it's not perfect.
Yeah.
So and watching a little bit of the mindset and the struggle and like because I don't know if you feel like this, this is kind of moving to a different direction, but like developers in general have to be a bit have to enjoy the pain because like 99% of our work is failure, right? And we live for the 1%. And so when I watch somebody streaming and I see that 99%, I feel the pain. So I there's a shared celebration between myself and that streamer because I've been there.
Yeah. No, I definitely I hear you on that. I agree. And I think there's something to be said to your point about the scripted presentations, the scripted
Yeah.
demos, the videos that people can watch. To be very clear, there's definitely still obviously value in that and like that's
Yes.
needed. I think and that's something else that I also tend to have to explain to folks to give them a more of a reason because they'll be like, well, why don't they just go watch videos? To give them more of a reason of why a programming stream would be beneficial. To me,
Yeah.
it's supplemental to the scripted video, right? So maybe
Yeah.
somebody goes and watches something on how to build an API with ASP.NET, but they go and do it, and like it just doesn't go the same, happy path that it does in the
Yeah.
video. So they get to go and maybe watch somebody and get that hands-on experience of seeing somebody else go through that same pain,
Yeah.
or they can interact live through the chat, right? You have that opportunity because it's just kind of sitting there and almost like co-working. And a lot of cases, some people stream themselves just co-working. They're not like, it's not like a show almost. It's
Yeah.
just, they're there, they're live. They just want to be around people, especially with the pandemic times, right? Having that feeling, that sense of being part of something with people, the community aspect of it. Um, just being live on stream, it's helpful for that because there's the interaction with other human beings, albeit
Yeah.
through a screen. It's still there. At least it's something that's been missing with being able to do that in person.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of value in it in that way, and I agree with you. Is my short answer.
Yeah, well, thank you for agreeing with me. So like it's also like a great marketing engine, right? Like if I'm working on an open source repository, right, and I have this package that I want to put together, and I'm streaming, working on it, people that might come across my repository will come to my stream. Maybe people that come across my stream will come to my repository, and I can get contribution that way.
Yeah,
Contribution and audience at the same time, right? So like if you're trying to build a brand, not that I'm trying to build a brand, but if you are trying to build a brand, that's your goal is to get followers, get contributors to your repository. Like you're going to use like a lot of the same channels everybody else uses. It's a
mm,
matter of how you want to be targeted in particular channels. Like we have shared friends that they stream like 10 hours a week, and that's awesome. Like it's just like the ability to do that, or 10 plus hours a week. Like that idea to me is like that's a lot. It's like
yeah,
that's a and some of these people like they're taking it very much as like a business decision, and that's great. I love that because back to our point about could we have been famous if we hopped on the train early for this stuff. Like this people are taking this opportunity. Well, okay, I'm not going to get super famous, but I can build a very strong network of people that have similar passions as me. And that's why I do this stream. That's why I watch people stream. That's why I'm avid in open source is I enjoy like having conversations and building community with people that I literally would never talk to otherwise. Like there's not very many opportunities for me to talk to some JavaScript developer in Florida, right?
mm,
Unless we're, talking about open source on a show because we both like open source and we both like tech.
yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
take that a step further. There was, well, again, pre-pandemic, there was opportunities through that came to be because of streaming, where I met a couple
Yeah.
people in person as a result.
Yeah.
Uh, and that was an awesome experience. Like I never would have thought in a million years of something like that happening, or that I would be okay with doing something like that, because I'm also pretty like reserved and kind of private about a lot of things. So it was really
Yeah.
interesting build that connection, online, and then to go and like, hang out with that person
Yeah.
in real life. So
So that's and I don't know. Have you been to TwitchCon before?
I have. I
You
walk
have, right?
on 2 times.
Yeah. So like that's something to me that I just think is just way too like meta, right? Like a community of people that only interact with people online, all coming to one place inside a building and talking about how they're successful talking to people online. Like
Mhm.
that to me is very very funny. And I'd love to kind of get your thoughts because Twitch is like rightfully so they've built, they are the YouTube of streaming, or the Twitter of streaming or whatever, right? Like they've solidified themselves as like the platform to use for this particular thing. There are other platforms that exist or have existed. Twitch is obviously one. So I'd like to get your thoughts like
For now,
as
just
for now,
it's
for
one
now.
one for now. They're the front runners,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think that there's a lot of I was listening in this. I want to finish my thought before I have this
Sorry.
other thought, right? Um, like so, Twitch has decided to kind of build like this community of content creators. So, what is that experience like as a content creator interfacing with like the content creation platform?
It was very. I think you kind of hit it on the nose with that, like where like it's very meta.
Yeah,
It's interesting. It felt like an awesome. Yeah, it was kind of almost surreal to like put faces to the names, because you have people's just like, it's not necessarily their actual names. It's their, handles that they
yeah,
use that's nothing to do with their names. So to like get to know them on a more personal level was really cool. To talk about stream production, I love geeking out over that type of stuff, like the gear and like what people do, like software wise in the production of their stream, and how they get some cool effects and whatnot. Being able to talk to people in person in a moment and kind of just brainstorm stuff too, and like generate ideas from doing that. I mean, it's what you would probably expect and what you've probably gotten out of going to other tech
yeah,
conferences, right? Getting to reach out and collaborate and talk with people in the community drives interests, and and creative ways to solve similar problems. Like maybe somebody else had a similar problem with an API and trying to interface with it, and this is how they got around it, kind of thing, you know? So that's kind of the stuff that I recall. It's been a while now that I recall happening when we were meeting. It also helped lead to us, you know, kind of, because at the time, you know, as everybody tends to know with Twitch, it's predominantly about gaming is like the big front runner of it, but there are lots of other categories on it. I think I would say the second biggest one after that is like, or at least at the time, was like creative and art. And they have like a whole expo at the conference that's dedicated to that space of folks that
That's cool.
to sell their artwork and stuff like that and kind of put it on display and whatnot. But like at that time, especially, programming was super small. So like it was really cool to see that small group of people still kind of pave their way at that moment in time and come together and get that same level of connection that the broader groups were getting too. So I hope that answers the question. I think
It does.
you know,
It does. It does.
yeah.
I think, and I think I probably asked a bad question too, but I think I was just generally curious, like what the experience is as a content creator. You know, it's kind of like, you know, you if you work internally at a company and you only use like tools they create, right? Like it's one of those things where you're inside the ecosystem and you have to interface with the ecosystem solely, but also company owns said ecosystem and changes direction whenever they feel like it, and that could potentially negatively affect content creators, right? I think in general too, and I liked your comment about platforms, right? Like I was listening to a podcast interview with Eric Schmidt, who used to be the CEO of Google, and he was talking about how like every 7 years or so, a new platform comes out and that platform takes over. Like it was MySpace, and then it was Facebook, and then it was Instagram, and now it's TikTok, right? And he was talking about how like all these platforms, they have a very short lifespan because technology gets to a point where other mediums exist, and also like this new generation of content creators, they're like, I don't want to do what the current generation does because that's lame, so I'm going to do this new thing. And I'd love to get your thoughts as somebody who, similar to me, watched Facebook get huge, watched Twitter get huge, watched Twitch, and now watch TikTok turn into a $1 billion company. Like, what is your thoughts on like how tech has just kind of enabled like generation after generation of like content creators to basically make a name for themselves and be able to financially secure their well-being?
My I mean, the short answer to that, my thoughts are, is it's awesome. Like I think it's a big reason why, what keeps me drawn into, and I think lots of other folks drawn into technology, is to you know, be part of that, be part of creating that, or just be part of supporting that. And I think it's just going to keep happening. It's just going to keep evolving. Maybe, you know, maybe it will even accelerate more. Like, because like you're saying, it's, you know, there was MySpace, Facebook, Instagram, all, you know, I feel like the time frame in between each is getting a little bit smaller and smaller right now. I don't know if you get in that sense too. So I wonder if it's going to keep accelerating, and then what might happen when we hit like there's too much of it, right? And then it becomes a lot of noise, and like which one is really the predominant one. So I don't know. I'm just speculating, but I feel like that's kind of where things are trending in that regard. And maybe, you know, I don't know what the results or outcome would be from that, but it's cool to see that and just kind of ride that wave. I mean, this kind of goes in the same thought process that I have around like just realizing as I've gotten older, you get, you know, more experience, more wisdom. I'm not saying I'm wise or anything, but you know what I mean? Like that wisdom that comes with age of and being self-aware and recognizing that your interests are naturally going to change over time too, right? Like I used to be really into building thick Windows client applications, and then I lost interest in that. And then I went into front-end web development, and then I got tired of dealing with styling that and putting it together. And I like building APIs, and it just keeps kind of, even within that niche of programming, my interest had changed from what I thought it was going to be. And, you know, I think the same thing's going to happen. There's probably content creators that are going through that today, where they started doing content creation on a specific thing and their interest has changed. And a lot of them, it seems like, from what I'm gauging from things that are going on and other people that are way more into the weeds of like how things are trending with this, but there seems to be like this not breaking point, but just, like this tipping point almost of folks that are in that situation, but they feel like pigeonholed into, this is how I started creating content and it really hit off. Maybe it went viral. It's supporting me as like a career, and I can't change to sharing and doing different types of content now as a result of that. And I think that's it's a shame that that's happening, that they're feeling that way. And hopefully they can feel the confidence that they can pivot and go to something else, but still keep being a content creator. So that's something else that I think is kind of happening right now. That's going to affect, where things land in the future in this space, in that regard.
Yeah, I mean it's a really well thought out thought too, like about your opinions change as you get older. Not to say they're always good. The changes are always good, but I think it is something to say is like as our priorities shift too, like it's very very important to continually do things that you get enjoyment out of. Like even if it's like maybe you're a developer by day and you don't want to be a developer period, you just want to make a paycheck, you still kind of have to enjoy doing the work, or else there's a ton of burnout there.
Yeah.
And some people are locked in and they feel like they can't switch careers because the money's good and all that sort of nonsense. But I think to get to my point, it's interesting, especially if our opinions change on what we find interesting, how platforms appear that kind of cater to that next generations of thought, right?
Yeah.
Like like honestly 2 years ago, I'll just use this as an example. Like I didn't understand like why people thought VR was cool, right? Like I was like, why would you put a VR headset on? Like it's gonna make me sick. Like the resolution isn't that great. Like why wouldn't I just play a video game? And then
Yeah.
this like 2 weeks ago I bought an Oculus headset because I had a gift card, and I was like, holy smokes, this is awesome,
Mm.
right? And it literally like the technology got to a point where it became interesting for me. People before me have like, oh, this has been awesome for a while. Like, yeah, maybe the resolution hasn't been the best, but it's been awesome for a while because of the immersive experience. And I see that and I'm like, okay, maybe I'm just slow to things. Like, obviously, I was slow to Twitch. I was slow to this thing. I've probably been slow to other things in the past. Maybe I just need lots of community adoption before I'd be like, I don't want to waste my time on this.
Sure. Yeah.
Because that's also the next platform that's coming out. Like I can only like all these companies are already investing in like this metaverse idea.
Mm.
I think now it's just a matter of making the technology accessible, which it is getting very close to. I think companies out there, the headsets aren't super expensive. They're not cheap, but they're not super expensive. The tech is really really interesting. And the community building is very interesting. It's only a matter of time before like the next MySpace or next huge platform is literally just you have to buy a headset and you just hang out in the headset, like Second Life. I don't know
Yeah.
if you played Second Life, um, or
No,
heard
but
of
I'm
Second.
aware.
Yeah, right. Like that experience where it's like all of my community, everything that I want from a platform perspective and like building a community and getting followers and friends is done like with avatars.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's what my opinion is at least.
No, well, the one thing that's running through my mind is you're saying you relate to the VR space, and I'm like, well, I'm not even in it, so I must be super late.
Yeah.
I
No, I mean, I honestly like I would have never bought one, and I had a gift card, and I'm like,
Yeah.
what can I buy at Best Buy? Because
Mhm.
I'd never go to Best Buy. I'm like, what do I need at Best Buy? And I'm walking around, and there's like, do I buy a video game? No. Do I buy like some accessory for my computer? No. And I'm like, oh, a headset, Oculus headset. Sure, why not? Worst case, I'll just return it. And I put it on and I'm like, oh, this is awesome. And my wife put it on and she was making fun of me and she put it on, she's like, oh, this is awesome. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, well, I mean, I think you got two people to say it's awesome that would literally were saying like 15 minutes ago it was trash. So it's doing its job.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, that's in that regard, it's something that I'm like keeping an eye on, but I haven't
Yeah.
really like dipped my toe even into that space that much. But I definitely I definitely can see what you're saying being very realistic. Like it seems realistic to me. It's funny to say that because it's ironic to say that because it's like it's not realistic.
No.
It's virtual.
Immersive. They say
Yeah, it's immersive.
they say the immersive experience, right? Which I think is very funny because all they want from an immersive experience is for it to feel real, right?
Yes.
Like, but they can't say real
No.
because that has a lot of problems and it's also not true.
Right.
Uh, so yeah, it's very interesting. Um, and I think one of the things, kind of switching gears a little bit, one of the things I really appreciate about watching your stream and just seeing your presence online is you're very open about wellness, right, in tech,
Yeah.
and I'd love to kind of get your you know your manifesto of sorts of like why wellness is important for people in tech.
Oh, well, why it's important? Well, one, I
Not to
think
put you on the
everybody.
spot. Not to put
Yeah,
you on
no,
the
no, no,
spot, right? Yeah.
no. It's fine. I don't mind talking about it. Um, I just think it's important for me. I can only just speak on for myself and why it's
Yeah.
important to me. Really, I don't know why it would necessarily be important for other people, but I would encourage it
Yep.
if as much as they feel comfortable being open and transparent about that kind of stuff. Um, so for me, what my streaming, it's very I streaming has become very close and near and dear to me. Like I was saying before, I'm not doing it to become an influencer. I'm not doing it to make like money off of it. It- to be honest, like my original thoughts about it was, oh, I can maybe become and like grow on there and become a streamer, like make a career
Yep.
out of it. But like so, really being transparent about that too. But I realized as I started doing it more and more, the thing that keeps drawing me in is one, I keep focusing on doing things that are interesting to me that I enjoy. But two, the community aspect of it, the relationships and connections that I've made have really helped me out a lot. And seeing people show up, maybe every week, every other week, whenever they can, or just, at least popping in every now and then and checking in and talking and hanging out has really been the value for it for me personally, selfishly. And so as part of that though, like I really always, back when I was more of the thinking of like I want to grow and build a brand, I
Yeah.
still kind of want to. There's still part of me that wants to build a brand up like on social
Yep.
media because it's good to me. I feel it's very good to market yourself as a developer to make you more hireable and all the different benefits of that. So there's that aspect of it for the career side of things. But when I was going through that though at early stages, there was definitely lots of things going on where you see people that are not really being true to themselves, right? Like you
Sure.
can kind of pick up on it. I've always felt like I've had I don't know that it's true or not necessarily, but I felt like I've had a knack to pick up on when somebody's being really honest,
Yeah.
or and like genuine to themselves, or they're just putting on for the sake of like creating an appearance, creating a personality for themselves online because
Yep.
you have the opportunity to do that and you can do that. And I'm not necessarily faulting people that are doing that, but for me, it means more to me to just connect with the actual person than like a personality that they're putting on just for the sake of that branding or whatever it is, right? That's just me. So knowing that I've realized that value that I had, I was like, I want to make sure that I don't fall into this same category or the same kind of trend that happens when it comes to building a brand or being online and present on the web. I wanted to be true to myself. So that's where this led to. I'm going to be, especially with my streams, as open and as honest as I possibly can with people, because one, especially if I'm in developer advocacy roles,
Yeah.
like that's you have to be because otherwise you become like you're this fraud and you're just shilling for the company that you
Sure.
work for, right? You have to be honest and realistic about what the situation is. Maybe there is a product that is better, you know but you can that kind of stuff. You have to be honest about that with developers because developers are going to call that out right away. I would call that out away. That's what I'm talking about. So knowing that that's where I wanted to go, that's what led me to be like to try and as much as I can, I bring my whole self to the stream. So what I mean by as much as I can, there's things like like I was saying before, I'm very private. I don't like to share too much about like my whereabouts, families, names, kids' ages, and that kind of stuff because of other reasons, privacy stuff that I just feel is important when it comes to the web. Um, but also like I want to be family friendly too, and my me naturally is more like a little bit looser with my language when I'm just at home and with family and stuff like that,
Sure.
especially my side of the family. Um, so that's what I mean by it. I'm not necessarily bringing my entire 100% self, but I'm
Yeah.
bringing most of it. All right. So I know this is a long-winded answer. So
No,
when I'm
no,
talking
it's not.
about wellness, I've dealt with and I've had issues, and it's run in my family a little bit too with depression. And so I've had, a couple more, uh, how would I put it? Like it shows up every now and then. I guess is kind of the way it slowly builds up and gets to a point where like it hits a breaking point, and I'm like, oh boy, this is not. I'm in a bad state again. kind of thing.
Sure.
And so I think it's important to bring my whole self and be honest with people about that, because the more we talk about it, the more we'll figure things out and how we can, uh, just help each other out to sort this type of thing out, right? If we stay quiet about it and more reserved and be embarrassed about it, which there's still some level of that, if I'm being honest,
Sure. Yeah.
then we're not really going to make that progress that we need to help solve these problems. So that's my thoughts on it. That's why I tend to do that, so that maybe, again, with that community aspect of it, maybe what I share resonates with somebody that's watching or listening or chatting in the chat room, so that they feel a little bit more comfortable about it. They know me, they've gotten to know me, and they see me doing that, and so maybe they'll feel more comfortable, and that'll encourage them to, tackle this thing more head on instead of trying to, be shy about it, or whatever the feeling is towards that, and how they approach it. So
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
sure.
And I'm completely spot on in agreement with you. Like, I'm very much of the belief that people will follow being like the canonical, like, hey, like, community people that find your stuff interesting. They don't sign up for just the JavaScript developer or just the .NET developer or just the person that streams. Like, like, they follow for the interaction that they get with you. Whether that be like, you responding to people on Twitter, or you talking in chat, and you being a version of yourself that you feel comfortable being. Not to say that people that have made careers out of being personalities, like, that's great. If that's what you want to do. But I very much subscribe to, like, I tell people this all the time, like, I'm very in the looking for genuine, like, looking for stuff to be genuine. Like, that's
Hmm.
my area of interest, right? um, to the effect that, like, I've had conversations with people at work where it's like, we're not being genuine enough with developers, right? Because developers, they only really care about, like, am I going to get my return on investment for whatever you're trying to tell me, right?
Yeah.
That being, am I going to enjoy what I'm doing? Am I going to be able to make money? Am I going to not be miserable the entire time? And if you're not transparent, you risk the opportunity of upsetting people, and that's not my business. So, to your point about your, 90% of yourself or whatever, without the swearing and without the whatever, like, that's great because it makes you more accessible too, right?
Yeah.
Um, and as long as we continue to have conversations, like, I'm very much of the mindset that, you know, my generation, like, I don't even know what we're called, millennials, I guess, millennials and forward, like, we have an opportunity to differentiate ourselves from other generations because we can be more outspoken about mental health, whereas previous generations haven't had that opportunity to do so because of stigmas.
Yep.
And, like, it's our responsibility to make sure that, like, hey, if my kid doesn't feel comfortable who they am, they have a choice in
Yep.
deciding who they want to be. If my kid or my friend is having problems, focusing, or having trouble staying on task, or having, like, troubles getting out of bed, like, we don't need to keep that quiet. Like, there's an opportunity for us to better all of our experiences. Sometimes it's really hard to feel like that's actually happening out in the real world from, like, a macro perspective. Uh, but what I'm that's, like, where my level of interest is. And
Yeah.
that's, to like I said a bit earlier, that's why I appreciate people that talk about it in a way that is genuine.
Yeah. And just to tack on to what you're saying before, like, kids, families, they feel more able to talk about it, but also to feel like they're not going to be shamed for it too,
Yes.
right? Which tends to be what has happened in the past, or at least history has shown. Like, that's the type of thing that happens with these, just being, feeling different,
Yeah.
being different, whatever, right? Like, that's the type of reaction that was typical of happening, before things gotten to where we're at now. But there's still lots of work to be done to improve that. And
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
with you. Each generation is going to have a responsibility to push things a little bit more forward in a better direction.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with a work colleague, and, like, just the phrases and the terms that that this person was in their early 20s. And the phrases this person was using, I was just like, I could not imagine being in my early 20s feeling comfortable enough in my own skin to use terms like this. And the
Yeah.
fact that they were using the term partner. Like I've been with this person for 5 years. They're my partner. It's
Yeah.
like I mean, just the new phrases and the new terms that have been introduced with these generations that have started to that have that have kind of grew into adulthood. It's really refreshing too, and it
Hmm.
helps me learn about the deficiencies that I might have in my character, right? Because I have all these
Sure.
bias that I'm trying to beat all the time, um, and having conversations with people that have completely different upbringings as me, it helps me identify my own bias and adapt, right? Part of the reason why I do
Yep.
this show, right? Like I don't like if I was just to talk to people like me, how am I supposed to ever grow as an individual?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I feel you on that, and like I think back, I've shared this. This is another thing that I've been transparent about. Like, and we were talking about as you get older, your opinions change and stuff like that. When I was younger, the nice way to put it was I was a jerk. Like I just was
Sure.
stupid. I didn't know. I mean, a lot of people go through
Yeah.
that, but I'm not using that as an excuse either. But I'm looking back and recognizing like, wow, I had some screwed up kind of points of view on things,
Mm-hmm.
and like while I'm disappointed in that, I'm glad that I've at least grown to where I'm at now, and
Yeah.
I'm sure like in years from now, I'm gonna look back on and like, here's these deficiencies that I had then in my values and traits maybe, and I've improved upon those. It's like
Yeah.
that's just what we can hope for, and that's why like I think it's important to kind of, even when people are, at least for me, like the way I try to approach things when I find people like maybe you ran into colleagues that don't have
Yes.
that feeling, or they don't feel it's okay to be talking that way, right? And trying to win them over, I think, is the best way, is to like understand where they're coming from a little bit, but then try to slowly but surely nudge things in the right direction, instead of just outright cutting them off kind of thing and be like, that's it, you know what I mean? Like, unless, I mean, there's exceptions to that, right? There's people that are like, even when you make this effort to try and work in a more cordial and like civilized way to help guide people in a new direction, they just completely shut you down and they just
Yep.
want to stay the way they are. Then that's fine. Not that that's fine, but I mean, like, it's fine to be like, we got to just cut ties here, right? Like
Yeah.
there's no point in me making this effort anymore. So yeah, I don't know. That's just my 2 cents on that too, because I feel like, and maybe I'm more of an optimist in this. Uh, I feel like there's opportunity, while there are people that still have those points of views that are still stuck in like old ways kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's opportunity still guide them to, these more improved and progressed kind of, uh, you know, approaches to things that we're seeing more and more happen now as we're
Yeah.
discussing, right? So,
Yeah. I think you're optimistic. I label myself as optimistic pessimist. Like I always
okay.
think of like worst case scenario on things just because that's how my
Hmm.
brain works. But like I have like I subscribe to a lot of hope, right?
Sure.
And I think one of the things that I'm very excited about is like, in 15 years when I'm in my 50s, like what the world is going to look like.
Mm.
And especially like what does tech look like? I was reading an article about how Ivy League schools, 15, 20 years ago, most of them didn't have computer science practical like curriculums, right? Like
Mm.
specific computer science curriculums, right? And now, like for instance, a study that I just saw from Princeton, 50% of their graduates in their computer science program are women, right?
Mm.
Like, which is, to me, that's like baffling because I see the tech landscape right now. And I'm like, if you go to a conference, obviously pre-COVID, if you go to a conference or you go to like a meetup, like maybe there's 10% are women,
Mm.
10% are people of color, like, and even a smaller percent are people that don't identify as a man or a woman. Like I think there you have this situation where there's tons of different opinions that we can get value from, and it's great to hear that things are starting to move in this direction where people are coming to tech and not immediately being like, oh, all it is like white straight dudes. Like that's not cool.
Yeah.
Um, so like I mean, that's what I'm looking forward to. Is like in 15 years, like I would love to be like not the I would my people that look like me not to be the majority of like literally everything, because it's like perspective is really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
For sure.
I mean it's interesting too. Like we talked a little bit about community building with streaming and talking about trying to figure out ways to identify with different communities, like talking about mental health, like, you know, from your perspective, like what does tech do a really good job at in like building community? And I know that's a really open-ended question, but I'd like to get your thoughts because as somebody who has, been in a few different communities, like as you mentioned, right? Like, what does tech do good, kind of across the spectrum? And you know what I'm going to ask after that. So maybe prepare that answer too.
All right. So in terms of what it does good, I would say, in the light of community, it helps make the connection a little bit more simpler and easier between people. What we've been talking about throughout the stream is like being able to connect with people that you normally would not have been able to connect with, from different areas, different perspectives, different experiences. And so I think that, like, generally speaking, that's what tech has done to help with community, building community and being part of communities, is making the connection part of that easier. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say. Final answer.
So what does it do wrong then?
Oh yeah, yeah. I did know that's where you're going with it.
Well,
So
that's the longer question, right? That's the longer
yeah,
answer.
I think sometimes it gets a little over ambitious on what it thinks is the positive value add that it's creating
Yeah.
for community, right? I think it sometimes, like, it may start out in a great idea and position in the first place, but the end result ends up being something that really isn't moving things along in the right direction.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's kind of like, I'm just generally speaking, like,
Yeah.
there's lots of things that are happening, current events, tech wise, that some folks will have strong opinions on with in that regard. But I know there's examples of that that's happened in the past too, and it's something that's just going to keep happening. But I think it's part of the process of figuring out the right solutions to the right problems, I think.
Are you trying to say that Angular React isn't a really big deal and we shouldn't care about it as much as we do?
I wasn't actually thinking of that, but now that you bring it up,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I have my opinions on that stuff too,
Yeah.
but
I mean, I guess it all leads to me, in my 2 cents of the matter is, it's like it's just a lot of different ways to collectively gatekeep, right?
mm,
Like, I think tech, the biggest problem with tech, in my opinion, is that, like, you said something that was very spot on, like taking yourself too seriously. Like, how many times have we jokingly said, like, we're not putting somebody on the moon, like this isn't a big deal. And you can't really say that anymore because now there's tech companies that are putting people on the moon. But I mean, beside the point, like, predominantly most of us don't do that.
yeah,
And you know, taking yourself too seriously, I think that's just a habit of human nature to kind of overemphasize the contribution that you make to society. Um, but I think the thing that comes about with that is, like, there's the superiority complex that gets built out with people in tech. I think
mm,
the gap in compensation is a part of that too, because you could adhere to a different lifestyle when you're in tech than you can with predominantly every other job that doesn't require like 8 years of education.
yeah.
Um, so it's interesting because how do we do better in this space? Like, I'd imagine that you've run into gatekeeping in your professional career and you like fit the mold, no
Mm,
offense, but you fit the mold as somebody that shouldn't be gatekept, right?
yep. Yeah.
Like, how are some of the ways that you've seen effective ways to kind of combat these sort of things?
I don't know that I'm the right person to answer that either, though.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, I can go based off of, I mean, I can only go based off of my experience of
Yep.
times where I felt like maybe I was gatekeeping, but it really, you know, people are going to be people.
Yep.
I'm not saying this like as an excuse. I'm just saying,
No, no.
reflecting on my experience of times where I felt like maybe I was being gatekeep. I think it's just a matter of, somebody might form an opinion on you, and then that's just it, and like, unless you're given the opportunity to change that opinion, uh, you know, it is what it is, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I don't know that I don't feel confident enough either
Yeah.
to think of a solution of like what would fix gatekeeping. All I know is that I'm wherever I can fit in to help support that
Yes.
and like push it along, I'm on board, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I
No,
just think, my voice is not the right voice to
that's
describe that.
I and I appreciate you being honest with that. And I think one of the things that I'm trying to figure out internally is, like, you're either part of the problem or you're helping to fix the problem, or you're just not acknowledging the problem at all, right?
Yeah.
And at times in my life, I feel like I've been like that third option. Like, it's not as bad as everybody says it is, right? And obviously over the course of the last 2 years or so, I've kind of had this epiphany where it's like, oh no, there's definitely a problem, and I feel like I need to solve it. I mean, and that's not fair to anybody, including myself. But I always like to get people's opinion, observations or perceptions on this sort of thing, because I feel like it is something that, to an extent, our generation is not responsible for per se, but we've helped indoctrinate, are continuing to indoctrinate, right?
Yeah.
So like, it has to, like, the resolution has to come at some point in time. So, I'm very much about the turning the circle into a U, letting everybody in, right? And I don't have all the answers either, and I appreciate you being very honest. I'm not the person that can best speak to this, but I think that there is something to say. It's like, everybody has their different opinions, and once those opinions get amalgamated together into something, it builds some form that's probably accurate to what the solution is,
Mm.
right? But I think at the end of the day, like, I just want tech to be a happy place for everybody. And I imagine you probably feel the same way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so while you're kind of going through that, at least for me, what's helped, to where I don't feel like I'm indoctrinating the patterns of old, kind of, so to speak, is anytime I feel like maybe I have a negative reaction towards something, is to challenge myself to be like, why am I having that
Yep.
reaction? Is it something that I've just been conditioned to feel or think? You know what I mean? And kind of dive deeper into that. It's like I'm really into just thinking about my thoughts, which is a blessing and curse in disguise, because that's kind of what leads to a lot of the other mental health issues that
Sure.
tends to happen
Yeah.
where you get inside your head like that.
Yeah.
But so that's where I feel like, I really do feel like that's a strength of mine, of being self-aware and self-reflective. But at the same time, it's also hurt me. I hurt myself with that
Yeah.
capability, right? But in any case, the point I'm getting at there is to maybe to be part of that supporting of changing the gatekeeping tactics and things that are kind of instituted, is to uh, break break free from that pattern ourselves individually,
Yeah.
that are maybe doing things, whether consciously or subconsciously, supporting that, right? So
Yeah. I mean, that's great insight. And again, like, hearing about these sort of conversations from like two white guys is probably not like the best look, but I think at the end of the day, we're not saying you and I, but people that look like us in the past have been the guilty party. So if we can be allies in any way, like, I think that's what moves everybody forward. So I really appreciate you being open about it.
yeah, for sure, we got to be willing to talk about things, right?
Yeah.
So otherwise, what change are we going to be able to see if we don't have that conversation and communicate about it?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we're about at the end of our show, and Brian, I want to thank you for coming on and chatting with me about all sorts of different cool things in tech that aren't super technical, but I think they kind
Yeah.
of they transcend, and my goal is for just a great conversation. So I really appreciate it. Um, when I end the show, I love to ask my guest, this canonical, like, if you could think of tech or open source, the community that's around it, like, what is the one word that comes to your mind?
Hmm. Quirky.
Quirky. That's the
Yeah.
first. That's the first quirky I've gotten. You might, maybe give me your thoughts on why quirky.
Well, I feel like we kind of summed it up throughout the conversation
Sure.
today, quite a bit, right? Like there's all kinds of quirky in the sense of like there's some things that are really good about tech. There's some things that
Yeah.
are really, maybe odd, if you will, want to describe it. There's some things that are bad. So it's like it has its quirks,
That's
right?
great. I mean, now I'm going to only define tech as quirky because that's just a funny word to me. It's obviously because of the Q and the U, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's fun. So, that's the end of our show. And Brian, I want to thank you again for hopping on here. How can folks, tune into what you're doing and follow you along on your journeys?
Sure. And thank you for opening up the opportunity for that. The one we talked about the stream. So I'm at twitch.tv/ClarkIO. And then that's usually my handle everywhere. So it's either ClarkIO or _ClarkIO if it was already taken on certain platforms, in
Yeah,
particular Twitter and Instagram. So
sure.
ClarkIO.
Awesome. Well, I thank you again for hopping on and chatting with me, and for everybody tuning in. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon on Coffee and Open Source. Bye bye.